Viewers, welcome to the Personal Injury Law Show. This is a show that talks about everything current in the law of personal injuries and relevant to you, the viewer. My name's Tony Carbone. I'm a personal injury lawyer of over 30 years' experience. With me tonight I've got Nunzio Tartaglia, the insurance partner in the law firm. Good evening, Nunz.
Good evening, Tony. Viewers, welcome.
And an associate in the law firm in insurance law, Alice Robinson.
Good evening, Tony.
Good evening, Alice. Tonight, viewers, are going to be talking about the risks of travelling overseas to have cosmetic surgery, also medical negligence in general, so it's a must-watch show.
Before we kick off, Tony, what's in the news?
We've got a lot of good stories in the news this week, viewers, a lot of relevant ones. The first one, fellas, is the story of a prisoner who was awarded $200,000 for not being properly looked after by the authorities.
Yep.
Tell us a bit about the facts of this case, Nuts.
Yeah, Tony, it's a story in which Organ, I think his name was convicted murderer who was in jail serving a sentence, I think, for about 22 years. Had hot liquid thrown over him in prison, and he sued the state of Victoria accordingly. And it's believed that the compensation amount is around 200 grand, and so obviously you can appreciate that it's a bit controversial in light of the fact that the victims' families who he unfortunately murdered are seeing him sort of profit out of his time in jail.
Well, Alice, the amendments to the legislation a few years ago means that the $200,000 will be kept in trust for about 12 months.
Well, I think, Tony, this is a really interesting case because obviously he can't access that money for 12 months. However, he might have relatives or family, for example, who might need it if he is, for example, the sole breadwinner in the family or something along those lines, although it would hurt the victim's family to see him getting compensation.
It gives the opportunity to the victims' families, the people that he murdered, to sue him and try and extract the $200,000 out of him. I think at least here, Nonce, the beauty of it is that whereas he wouldn't have money in the past, now there's money that they can get their hands on.
Yeah,
that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, look, the law is that any compensation over 10 grand to a prisoner really stays in like a quarantine fund, and that allows the victims' families to effectively potentially access that money if they've got a viable case. So, I think it's government gazetted and it's there.
Yeah.
It's there in the public domain, and they've got 12 months to potentially have a grab at it.
And Alice, the beauty of it is that there's a real prospect that this fellow will not get the benefit of the money. That will probably go to his victims.
That's right. If they run a successful victims compensation case and there is a lot of money there to be accessed if there are some seriously psychiatrically injured victims, then yes, it's unlikely he'll see a dollar.
I'm confident that will happen. Let's keep moving. Robert Hughes, hey dad, convicted, 9 out of 11. The jury's still considering the last two charges. What does that mean, Nonce, from a point of view of civil liability?
Oh, look, arguably, they've got a case against Robert Hughes, and we're talking offset, Tony. Is it a work cover case? Is it a public liability? What realm is it in?
It's interesting, Alice, because when the said allegations occurred, they were working. It was on the set.
That's right.
Do you believe it's workers' comp, or do you think it's...
In this case, Tony, it's most likely to be workers' compensation because the allegations have arisen out of the course of employment, or what we would call the course of employment. And so it's likely to be workers' compensation first and foremost, unless they can show other or extenuating circumstances.
What about the ones that happened outside the set? At home? Yeah.
Well, look, arguably they've got a case against Robert Hughes, but I suppose the issue in this case is he wouldn't have any insurance to fund any civil claim against him, and it might be getting blade over stone, especially in light of the legal fees he'll be paying now in light of this case. So.
Yeah, but he might have some assets. He's been around for a long time. He's 65. He'd probably have a house or two, an investment property. You just don't know.
But those victims who did happen on a work site, are they out of time to put a claim in, Tony?
No, you would have thought that you'd get the appropriate extensions.
Yep.
I mean, the law. We had that case years ago where the lady was raped and she sued the Aboriginal leader, if you recall. He lost his title after that. But
okay.
Do you know what I mean? There was a significant extension. But you've got to be able to show why you didn't put in a claim initially.
Yep.
And I guess you've also got when you discover you've got the tort.
The date discoverability.
Yeah, date of discoverability kicks in too, doesn't it, Alice?
That's right, yes.
Let's keep moving. We'll come back to this story of Robert Hughes. It's very interesting. Tell us about the Coles supermarket, Alice. A processed meat that was out of date.
Yes, that's right, Tony. A certain supermarket run by Coles has been found to be stocking and therefore selling processed meat that's out of date, which is obviously a massive health concern for anybody buying the product, and it creates a liability on Coles that I'm sure they don't need. But it's it's very concerning that these kind of products, which are out of date and dangerous to people buying them, are available without anybody checking them. Maybe there's a problem with the Coles system of checking their food before it goes onto the shelves.
Or maybe someone's failing to rotate the stock.
Yes, I would say that's
There's
probably
that
part
other
of
issue
it.
too.
Well,
Yes.
they pleaded guilty to, I think, 7 of the charges, and they've said, made a public statement that their processes have changed, look, whether they have or have not, that'll be the big question. If something happens after this, they'd be in real strife. But look, Tony, there's an arguable public liability claim for anyone was poisoned by this off food.
Well, in Adelaide, unlike Victoria, you'd only have to show that you've been affected for a period of about a week. You know what I mean? So you'd think that anyone had sustained any injuries out of this, I don't know, food poisoning, who knows?
You'll be out of whack for a week.
Even
Yeah.
psychologically, you might not have anything wrong with you, but you think you have. Yeah. So in those circumstances, you'd think they've got a claim.
Yeah.
If it happened in Victoria, chances are you wouldn't be able to sue because you wouldn't be left with the 5% whole person impairment. Alice.
That's right. It would be much more difficult, Tony, because in Victoria we need to show that we've got an impairment over 5% of our whole body impairment, and we need to show that it's permanent. And with food poisoning, that's a lot less likely.
Unless you get long-term effects, and I know some people that have eaten oysters that have been bad and they're still suffering years later.
Yeah, that's right. You can have
Or like you
those.
said, the psychological effect of eating some off food, and it happens, unfortunately.
Interesting case. A lady sued the police where her former partner attacked her. The interesting thing about this case, Alice, is that there was a previous decision, the Yorkshire Ripper, where the police department was sued and it was held that you can't recover damages. What's the difference between that case and this case, Alice?
In this case, Tony, it looks as though the courts are going to hold the police responsible for not taking any action where they've got the knowledge and ability to do so, which is different from the York Ripper case, because and it's also different, for example, for some doctors, what they call the Good Samaritan duty. But I think the understanding is that the police are there as part of their public duties to look after the public, and where you've got that kind of knowledge, you're going to be held accountable if you don't do anything about it.
Well, in the Yorkshire Ripper, Nunzio, it was just the general public at large, whereas here, a specific person's gone to the police and said, look, I've been contacted,
And they knew who it
I've been
was.
threatened, and you've got to do something. I actually want you to do something.
Yeah, and they knew who it was. They knew how to identify him, and I think it is distinguishable, and I think that's what it's eventually will be found anyway.
And it's settled out of court.
Yeah.
Viewers, we've got to go to a sponsors break. Stay tuned. After the break, we'll be telling you about the pitfalls of travelling overseas for cosmetic surgery. Viewers, welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be talking about the pitfalls of travelling overseas to have cosmetic surgery. Now, Alice, these days the insurers are offering cheap holidays to go to places like Thailand and other places in Asia to get surgeons to operate, to do all sorts of procedures. What are the common pitfalls?
Yes, Tony, I have a few concerns about this particular thing. And these insurers are private health insurers, so they're offering it to people who are already part of their membership or even encouraging people to become members. And they're offering effectively a luxury holiday that includes cosmetic surgery or some other surgery as part of the deal. Quite often they're offering discount holidays or really luxury hotels. And you might say even, Nunzio, that it's an inducement to undertake this sort of surgery overseas. They do say on their websites and promotional materials, oh, it's okay, we're vetting the doctors who are agreeing to sign up to this new scheme. However, I think it's a real worry, because one of the first problems that you might have if you run into any problems having surgery overseas is that you won't be able to sue an overseas doctor because a cause of action doesn't arise. That's to say nothing of the health insurer where there might be contractual arrangements. But I think it's a real concern, because unless you do your research, how are you going to know you're getting safe treatment?
Well, Alice, what if the insurer's happy to sign that if a cause of action arises, you can sue in Victoria?
Tony, in one way, I can't see how they could possibly get out of it, because there's so much inducement on the websites and promotional materials to take on these holidays. It's almost as if they're encouraging people to look for healthcare outside of Australia, and in circumstances where you might not be so familiar or where it might not be safe. I think really they would be exposing themselves to a lot of liability in these types of cases.
But I don't think they can say, look, that any cause of action that arises will occur in Victoria if that's the case, because any cause of action will be against the surgeon, and the surgeon has the right to defend that. So I don't think they can actually agree to that type of clause in any agreement. But
I think it can. There's a lot of instances where
not if the cause of action's not against them, though.
Oh, look, it's probably against the surgeon and the hospital, and the insurer steps into the shoes. I think you could probably get around that.
Yeah, but look, just on what Dallas said, looking at some of the promotional ads surrounding this, I thought I was looking at an overseas Thailand holiday. That's the way it's been marketed and advertised. And look, I'm a bit with Alice. I'm a bit uncomfortable with it, because I think it sends a wrong message. Yeah,
of course. But okay, let me give you an example. The main surgery that's been occurring overseas is breast implants. Okay. Give us the facts of this young 24-year-old Queenslander that went to Thailand, Nunz.
Yeah, she went to Thailand to obviously, I think, get breast implants, and unfortunately, it didn't go to plan, and now she's left with horrific injuries, scarring, issues with her nipples, and I think she won't be able to breastfeed. There's and disfigurement, so it's been a disastrous outcome for her, and in terms of recourse now, I just don't think she's got any, because I said over there, what are you going to do?
Well, Alice, some of the symptoms she's got now is that she's got no filling in her left breast, she's got no nipples, and permanent scarring. And the doctors have cut off the blood supply to her chest.
That's right.
She's come back to Australia, and she's needed a lot of surgery after that. It causes problems, doesn't it?
That's right, Tony. And a lot of times when you've undertaken surgery and the outcome hasn't been ideal, sometimes you need follow-up surgery or follow-up care, and that can be expensive, not to mention a whole lot of extra pain and suffering that you weren't bargaining for.
But that's always the key issue with these type of surgery, especially breast surgeries and so forth, is that the post-operative care, I think, is the most key component of it, and I think that's where a lot of the issues arise overseas as well, because they can't provide the required post-operative care. So
that is a massive issue, isn't it?
And then that puts a burden back on Australia, because they come back and they want Medicare to fund everything, and ends up costing us more money than what it should have.
Well, one of the key elements to surgeons in Australia advocating that you shouldn't travel overseas to have this surgery is this issue about, are overseas doctors inferior to Australian doctors? What can you tell us about the literature on this?
Yes, I think, Tony, this is something that I was alluding to before, and it is a problem because it's a very delicate political area, trying to say that perhaps doctors overseas aren't as well qualified or don't have the experience or can't do as good a job as doctors back here. But that said, Tony, there's always going to be an element of the unknown, even if the doctor is well qualified. And I think if people are going overseas for procedures they could have here, and you've got the added inducement of the private health company saying, oh, we'll also arrange you what looks like a cheap luxury holiday, I think it's just going to cause a lot of issues for people who think, oh, that's great, I get a holiday and I get surgery, and it looks legitimate because it's being promoted by a legitimate company such as the Private Health Fund.
Is it the problem, Nunz, that you've got a situation, it's elective surgery, okay? It's not life-threatening.
No.
And if you're doing it in Australia, wouldn't you want to know who your surgeon is? At least have a couple of appointments to ask questions.
Yep.
Here, you're going into the unknown. You're dealing with people you've never heard of. You don't even know what their standards of qualification are. You don't know if it's the same high standard the Australian government's got.
Well, look, that's a good point, Tony, because I think the literature does in fact show that Australia particularly has more strict regulations around surgery and the requirements around that. And unfortunately, overseas, I think they're a bit more relaxed from what we've read. So, and you're right, just knowing who you're going to see, what their form is like. I said you can't know that because it's like picking a needle out of a haystack. You're just guessing.
I recently heard of someone wanting to go to Bali to get their jaw fixed and teeth. Now, I've been to Bali twice and they've nearly brought me back in a body bag twice. The first time, I don't know what I got, and the second time, I ended up with hepatitis A. I had a salad. That was my mistake.
Yeah.
Now, if we're worried about staff and things like that in our hospitals, what are you likely to get in a Balinese hospital?
But that's what the surgeons are saying also, that when you come back, you might come back with all these bacterial infections as well, and that brings up other issues, Alice. So.
That's right. And also, if you could be coming back carrying a bacteria or an infection that's resistant to drugs back here because it's not a common infection, or you're bringing a new sickness back with you, it all sounds very morbid and scary. But that's the problem that the doctors are saying that they will be facing in these types of scenarios, because you don't know what you're getting, and you're facing the unknown factor in terms of the treatment and the follow-up over there as well, if there is any.
Well, let me give you this quote. The Australian Medical Association President, Dr. Steve Hambleton, said that when you travel overseas and eat lettuce or a salad, you could return home with a multi-drug resistant bug in your bowel, which could be there forever. And, I've heard of a case recently where the person had to have the bowel removed because the drug was the infection was resistant to drugs.
That's right. That's right.
And also, are we saying that you should never have surgery overseas, or...?
No, look, I don't think we're saying you should never, but I think the key message to viewers would be proceed with extreme caution, because you don't know what you're getting into, and it's not like you're going to a world-famous surgeon in London or New York or in Europe, but you're just going to someone in Thailand who you've got no idea what their form's like, and you talk about your body, and I say proceed with extreme caution. And look, Australian surgeons are world-class. Look, I know it's a cost factor, but can't have it both ways.
Viewers, this is a topic that we do want your comments on. Tell us if you're for or opposed to this issue of having cosmetic surgery overseas. Give us your Facebook and Twitter comments. And stay tuned, we're going to a sponsors break. Viewers, welcome back to the show. We're talking about the pitfalls and advantages of travelling overseas for cosmetic surgery. Just quickly, Alice, this brochure put out by NIB in relation to this trip to Phuket, it shows a beautiful resort, but shouldn't it really be showing you pictures of the operating room and things like that?
Yes, Tony, I think this is where we do get into very sticky ground, because, for example, you could be looking at the website or, for example, the brochure, and see that it's advertising a holiday, and almost as a side note, it's talking about the sort of procedure and the sort of doctors it's offering for whatever surgery it is you're going overseas to have. And I think that the real concern here is that whilst NIB give a lot of assurances that they're vetting the doctors and the medical facilities to make sure it's all above board, I still think that the potential to bring home something that you didn't bargain for is pretty high. And I agree with Nunzio when he says to proceed with caution on these sort of things.
Well, some of the things they mentioned, Nunz, and I'll throw this at you now. Treatment by a qualified plastic surgeon. Qualified by whose standards? Accredited medical facility. Accredited by who? Nunz, they're going to give you post-operative care and 12 months care after promise, whatever that means.
Look, that I think is one of the pros of going through a private health insurance such as that, because you get the post-operative care. And What I'd say to viewers is that if you are going to go overseas for surgery, I'd much prefer that option as opposed to just, Googling someone overseas and saying, oh, they sound okay. But look, there's a lot of unanswered questions with that package.
And there's a writer to this. It says conditions apply to the aftercare promise. What are the conditions? Pay for your own airfares again and accommodation. Who knows? You don't know. You should get it checked out properly.
That's right. You'd need to examine it very carefully. And Nunzio is right when he says it probably beats just arranging something on your own, because the private health insurer is going to have better resources. But I would still be very cautious.
We should try and get someone from the insurer on the show. Just
Yeah, it'd
to
be
see
an
what
interesting
their
episode.
experiences
Definitely,
are.
yeah.
Wrongful birth. What does that mean, Nunz?
Well, effectively, Tony, there's a principle where parents can sue if obviously there's been some injuries to their child, their fetuses at birth stage, and it's a very contentious area of law because suing doctors, hospitals, gynecologists, and the like, it's very difficult. But look, it's an area of law that's is always going to be there.
Alice, give us some examples of wrongful birth.
Wrongful birth cases, Tony, are politically a very difficult area, but they mostly centre around what they call in utero injuries, or injuries sustained by a baby before it is born and whilst it's in the uterus. For example, where tests aren't carried out to find out that mum's carrying a disease which affects the baby profoundly, and then the parents say to the doctor later on, well, had you told us, we may have made a different decision about this child and whether or not we were going to carry on with the pregnancy. So it is really a very contentious area. But generally speaking, the courts seem to have taken the view that if there was something that could have been done before the baby was born and that would have picked up something that they call a birth defect, then it is on the doctor to tell mum and dad about it and give them the ultimate choice as to whether they carry on with the pregnancy. And if that choice is not given to mum and dad, the courts do seem to be saying that mum and dad can sue for the compensation associated with raising the child they may not have otherwise had.
And Nunz, we're not talking about very small symptoms after birth. We're talking about people severely disabled here.
No, these claims go into the millions, Tony, and we'll talk about one tonight, which was assessed at about a $10 million mark, and I know that our firm settled one a couple of years ago for just over $6 million. So we're talking some serious dollars. So that's why they're contested quite aggressively by both the plaintiff side and also the medical insurers.
So you're generally talking about people that have got serious physical and or brain injuries.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, and they require effectively lifelong care, and that's always the hard part about these claims. How much do you if you can prove fault against either a doctor or a hospital, how much care is actually required going forward?
And they're the sort of cases that it's really hard for family members to look after the child.
Yeah.
It's impossible without extra care from the outside. To actually, it's 24-hour care, really.
Yeah, and they've got to raise other, I'm sure other members of the family, and they've got to work as well. It's almost impossible. So you feel for the parents because it'd just be a horrific way of upbringing a child.
Alice, there's been a recent decision of the New South Wales Supreme Court, Waller and James. Can you give us the facts briefly?
Yes, Tony. This is a complex case because it's actually been all the way to the High Court and now it's come back to the New South Wales Supreme Court for a final decision. But young Keaton Waller was born profoundly disabled because of some tests that his parents said the doctor should have undertaken before he was born. And what the High Court initially established was that the parents could sue the doctor for failing to undertake that test and then failing to advise them of the profound disabilities that the baby was eventually born with. Although the New South Wales Supreme Court, after they dismissed the doctor's appeal and had to decide the case anew, as it were, found that, of course, yes, that the parents could sue for the care and the upbringing of the disabled child. However, unfortunately, in this case, Tony, they weren't able to establish that the disease in particular, which was a version of deep vein thrombosis that the father carried before the child was born, they couldn't establish as a matter of medical fact that that had caused the child's disabilities because there was conflicting medical evidence presented.
Alice, you've raised the issue of causation.
I have.
So on the issue of causation, Nunz, that is, did the doctor's failure lead or cause to the child's defects? What did the judge specifically say about that?
Well, they said that effectively the baby's injuries were not caused by the doctor's negligence, and although effectively they said there was a breach by the doctor, that wasn't the cause of the injuries, and unfortunately now the parents are left with no compensation and left with a big legal bill to pay the medical insurers' legal fees. That's a disastrous outcome.
So the doctor for the insurer essentially said, Professor Paul Menangle explained that there was no epidemiological evidence linking ATD to Keaton's stroke.
Yep.
Plaintiffs could not establish that the stroke was caused or materially contributed to by Keaton's ATD.
There was evidence led that effectively this hereditary condition, was asymptomatic in children, that it really only comes to fruition, when you're 20 and above, and that all you need is really to stay on medication and do some, I suppose monthly or regular checkups. And they were saying that the stroke was not caused by this hereditary condition. So,
well, they're talking about an appeal to the High Court again, so we'll keep the viewers posted on that. So stay tuned, viewers. Anything else you'd like to add, Nunzio?
Look, I've got to say, these cases, unfortunately, there is a lot of inquiries in relation to cases such as this around birth, and all I'd say is go get advice, because it's such a complex and detailed area of law that you do require the advice of a lawyer. And look,
you've got a couple of your own.
Yeah, we do, and so they're big cases that take a lot of time, but they're big money.
Alice, you're part of the team. Anything you'd like to add, or?
I think, Tony, it's really important to see a lawyer and talk through your options and raise any questions you have early as well. And with these birth cases, because there are a lot of issues to sort out, it is important to cover that with your lawyer and to talk to them about, your particular circumstances, because it'll vary from case to case.
Viewers, very contentious issue here of wrongful birth. Give us your views on Facebook and Twitter. Nunz, Alice, thanks for coming on board.
Thanks, Tony.
Viewers, stay tuned for future episodes. Go to our past episodes, go to our website and everything else. And always remember to stay safe.